I think it might be better if Ilango go first and then I follow him. Because I see my presentation on.
No.
Okay, it's okay. Right.
Yeah. You already.
Don't worry, no one.
I was on the back, but it's fine.
Yeah. Silly with
The blue or the color just because the slides look green.
I don't know.
No,
I don't know why they're green.
yours-
They're not green here.
Okay, well,
They look okay there. It's the projector. That's fine.
That means, well, let's see.
I think it's, is there a colour? Yeah. Must be something to do with being down here. Gravity is different. Oh, well, it should be. Oh, good. Do you mind just filling those in quickly and then I'll... Sorry, do you have that? I need to just see it.
Why is it green?
I don't know. Why is that projector green? Both the projectors are green, but this is not. No, this is fine. That's fine. It's green.
Right.
Those two are green. It's one here.
It's supposed to be white, right?
Yeah, it's all supposed to be white. Yeah, but it's also on the Meteco laptop here. It's green, but the monitor there is fine.
Right, so you're projecting this one over there, are you?
I'm projecting this one.
This one, right. So if I get that one? Ah, right, okay. Is it for you?
Yeah.
Let me have a look. Yes.
Well, yeah, it's 2 hours work. Yeah, I see that
Better?
Yeah.
This,
Just out of sync, probably.
right.
Awesome. And I'm assuming the mic should be here,
Yeah.
right? That's. Is that
No, closer, because
Closer.
yeah, they usually don't work.
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so welcome to NVO3 down in the dungeons. I'm Matthew Bocci and my co-chair is Sam Aldrin. And Ignace is our secretary for today. So this is the new Notewell text. Please take some time to look through it, but essentially what it's saying is anything you say here is treated as a contribution to the IETF, so be careful what you say. Right, administrivia. So blue sheets are going around. Apologies, they were a little bit late because we didn't have any. Thanks. Thank you, Martin, for going to get some. Note takers. So Ilango is going to take the notes, but he has to leave. Ignace, sorry. Is going to take the notes, but has to leave. If we don't overrun, we shouldn't. If there's anybody else who would like to assist him, then that would be absolutely great if you're taking your own notes or anyway. We would very much appreciate that. Please send them to the chairs afterwards if you're happy with that. Thank you. Right. So this will be a normal meeting again. So we're not going to do any roundtables this time, as we have done sometimes in the past. And please keep to your time slots so that we can keep the meeting to the agenda. Okay, so AD and working group personnel changes. So Aliyah is stepping down after her 2 terms, I think, as a routing area AD. So thank you very much, Aliyah, for your guidance and support and help with getting some really good results from the working group and your encouragement to the working group. So thank you. And so Martin Vigoro is now taking over as our new AD. So do you want to stand up? So welcome, Martin, and yeah, good luck. Also, Ignace has been our secretary for quite some time now, has been appointed an ops area AD, and so he's stepping down as the NVO3 secretary. So thank you, Ignace, for your excellent minutes and all your help in organising meetings and other logistical things with the working group. We will be looking for a new secretary because we find having a working group secretary is very, very useful. So if you're interested in this prestigious role, please do come and see the chairs afterwards or drop us an email. We would very much appreciate some extra help with running the working group. If you want to find out what being a secretary is all about, there's some information in RFC 2418, and there's also a draft, which I think is expired now, but there was a draft written on how to be a good secretary. Agenda. Okay, so here is the agenda. A lot of the time on the agenda is taken up in sorting out some of the issues around security and security requirements for Draft Genève. So we've got a big slot for that. That's after our status update. Then Greg is going to talk a bit again about the overlay OAM header, which was one of the outputs of the routing area OAM design team. Then we've got a couple of other drafts, new drafts, individual drafts, and then we want to have a short open mic about next steps and what we'd like to do next, and we'll get some feedback from you about what you would like to do next in the working group. Okay, so milestones. So this is actually the latest version of the milestones that I think we presented these in an interim meeting that we had in January. So I've updated these on the tracker. Document status. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 RFCs, and we've got a new RFC now since the last IETF, which is the multicast framework. That's 8293. The split NVE control plane requirements are in the RFC editor's queue. We probably should liaise back to the IEEE on our progress with this. They're in a ballot stage with the VDP document at the IEEE, and we received an incoming liaison on that, which I sent to the list. So the chairs are going to do a response to that, but we would very much appreciate if you could take a look at that liaison, and if you're interested and you want to review the VDP document from the IEEE, come and see us, and we can give you the password for access, the URL and password for access to that from the IEEE server. Data plane encapsulation. So we would ideally, that's draft Geneve, the standards track one. We would like to ideally last call this after this IETF. And along with that, last call the NVO3 draft, which was the output of the design team that chose draft Geneve, either at the same time or straight after the last call for draft Geneve. It is somewhat dependent, draft Geneve, on us adopting the Geneve security requirements document. So hopefully we can resolve the outstanding issues with that at this meeting. There is an ongoing poll for adoption of that document. So ideally we'll just treat any comments there as part of that adoption process. So that's draft MGLT NVO3 Geneva security requirements. So please take a look at that and comment on the list. We also have the virtual machine mobility protocol draft, which has been around for some time now. I think it's probably about time that we went to last call with that. So maybe after we've got the work with draft Geneva out of the way, would be a good time to wrap up that. Okay, do you want to say something?
Yeah, well, Jorge Rafadan, Nokia. Yeah, I was wondering, so we have this EVPN applicability draft that you guys requested. So, I mean, we should issue a working group adoption poll soon.
Yes, I agree with that, yeah. I'm a co-author of that as well, so I think Sam will manage that process.
So, yeah, we're going to start the process, and we're going to follow up with the IPR poll and other stuff.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the incoming liaison that I just mentioned from IEEE 802.1. So they have begun a sponsor ballot on 802.1 QCY. So that's the final stage of balloting for the draft. So it's kind of similar to last call in the IETF, I suppose. And they'd appreciate feedback by the 15th of May this year from NVO3 participants on this draft. So please see the chairs for details of how to access the document. Do you want to say anything, Pat?
Yeah, so I'll be retiring, but we'll send a message to the list with the names of the editors and the 802.1 task group chair that's going to be managing this so that people can send their feedback to the correct email addresses. And we would really appreciate feedback before we progress the document. Sponsor ballot is the final stage. It's roughly equivalent to last call in IETF, so getting close to done.
Thank you. Okay, now we're on to the session presentations. So the first slot, sorry, Pat.
Sorry, one more thing. Last time it really helped to get some people to actually commit to review. If you could ask for some people to actually
Yes, that's a
raise hands
very good point. If you would like to volunteer, it'd be very much appreciated to review this document from the IEEE. Either just raise your hand now or come see the chairs at the end, or drop us an email soon.
Yeah, this document is the control plane for the split NVE.
Okay. So I think next, actually, we're going to move on to the security requirements document for draft Geneve. And the way that we're going to run this is that Elango is going to do a remote presentation of his comments on the document, which I think were posted to the list. And then Daniel is going to respond as editor of the requirements draft, security requirements draft, with an update on the status of that and how he proposes to resolve those comments. So Rango, you're on mute, okay? I think I need to push the...
Yes, are you able to see me?
Yes, we can see you, thanks. I think I'll bring up your presentation here.
All right, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. We have it on the screen, so just say when you want me to move on to the next slide.
All right, so yeah, I'm going to talk about the the comments on the security requirements draft and the comments, as Matthew said, that it's been already posted to the mailing list. So this is I'll have a summary of the comments that I presented. I don't have to go through each and every comment in detail, but the theme of the comments and the highlights of the outstanding issues and how we are working with the authors to resolve this as we move forward. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Yeah, the theme of the comments is to focus on the potential security threats and the requirements to migrate those threats as applicable to Geneve deployments. The key point is, Geneve can be deployed in multiple different environments. Example, you can deploy in a multi-tenancy environment. It could be deployed in a private enterprise to provide isolation between multiple departments and so on, and it could also be deployed in other telecommunications environment as well for providing isolation. Threats depending upon whether you are in a multi-tenancy environment or whether you are in a private enterprise, the perceived threat or the potential threats could be different, and how the operator try to resolve those threats could be different. The document itself, the security requirement documents will highlight the different potential threats that are possible in an environment, and then the requirements also could be generic, but then the user can choose the requirements that are applicable to their environments. So the key point is not all data center environments have all possible risks as highlighted in the document, and so the reader should be understand that they will deploy the solutions that are applicable to their environment. Okay, and with that, let's move to the next slide.
Okay. We're on the next slide.
Yeah, so these are some of the outstanding issues that are being resolved currently as we speak. So the number one is actually data privacy. The data privacy can be offered by a service provider, or a tenant could bring their own data privacy policies. The reason being, some of the tenants may not trust the underlying service provider, and what they might decide to do is to bring their own policies in order to do encryption, and this could be done at their payload. So any payload that they puts into the underlying network would be pre-encrypted even before it reaches the network virtualization endpoint. So that's one model. And the other model is the customers might or the tenants might trust the service provider to provide data privacy as a service. In such a scenario, the service provider will be providing that as a service, and the tenant might provide data that could be on the clear, or it could also be encrypted, depending upon how the tenant wants to present the data. But irrespective of that, the service provider will offer data privacy as a service. And that's basically what we are saying is the network virtualization endpoint, depending upon the role it plays, will offer this as an option, or it could be offering it as the one that the tenant chooses to use it. The second one is, some of the stated requirements may not be applicable to Geneve transit devices. This is the one thing that we noticed, when we looked at the Geneve security requirements document. There was some misinterpretation on the role of the Geneve transit devices and how the transit devices plays in the architecture. So typically, the transit devices are, it could be forwarding elements. like switches or routers that forward the Genev packets as part of the underlay, right? So is nothing different than transporting any IP packets on the network. Genev is just going to be one layer above that. So there are some, we need to reconcile some of the requirements in the document to be consistent with the Geneva architecture. We have already reached out to the security requirements draft authors, and then we are working to, reconcile the differences. And also some of these requirements, like partial encryption, where, based upon that interpretation, those requirements were written, and I think we need to reconcile those ones as well. We believe that the existing mechanisms that are already available could be used in order to address those threats, or in order to address those confidentiality or authentication requirements. And the next point is the requirements related to performance optimization. We saw certain requirements were related to performance optimization, and what we are saying is, the requirements related to performance optimizations are necessarily not to address any specific threat. So which means that those are more of a nice to have and not necessarily a security requirement. And so example of those one will be like a flow-based granularity, and the other one is like partial encryption. So those are the things that we need to resolve that and make sure that some of those performance optimizations are not necessarily something that is an absolute requirement in terms of addressing a security threat. And these are something that we are still working with the authors on. The other one is, there's also another document on NVO3 security requirement that was generic security requirement that addresses control plane security as well as data plane security, and that document also has a multicast requirements related to multicast use case. And so what we were saying is, Geneva is not any different than that, and so why not use, why do we have to repeat that in this document? But again, we do not know what the status of that document and whether we decide to progress that or not. So that's another point, is like if it is not going to be progressed as a separate document, then in that case we need to make the Geneva security requirements as self-contained, and we might have to bring in those requirements here. And the other point we want to say in terms of multicast is, many of the data center deployments, the underlay network doesn't support multicast. For example, it doesn't support IP multicast. In such a scenario, what the operators do is they offer unicast tunnels, right? So they use unicast tunnels in order to realize multicast over this underlay network. So that's also a possibility. In such a scenario, all the requirements that are related to unicast tunnels equally apply for the multicast. You don't need a separate multicast requirement, and that needs to be clearly separately documented. And that's pretty much what I have in the summary. And we had few other comments, but those are being resolved, and we don't have any outstanding issues. So as a next steps, what we are doing is we are working with the authors of the Geneva security requirements document, and then we are trying to resolve those comments. So after the meeting, we have some more work to do, and then we will go and address that. And Daniel will continue with the presentation, and then he'd talk about his document framework and what are the necessary steps he's taking in order to address these comments. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're going to move straight to Daniel. Who can just give the author's response to that? Do you want to?
Thank you. Yeah. Hi everyone. So basically, I'm going to provide the author view as a response to Ilanga feedbacks, and how we're going to move the document forward, and how we're going to address his comments. So the requirement document got two goals. In fact, one of the goals is to list any possible requirements, so that if we want to design a generic security mechanism for Geneva, we can address any kind of situations. And this is, the downside is that we came up into some somehow complex requirements. But another goal of this document could be, and easily achieved, listing a comprehensive list of requirements so that when you have a deployment, specific deployment, you know exactly which requirements applies to in your case. And so in your specific deployment, you might not use the generic Geneva mechanisms, but you might use an alternate way to secure the communications. Let's call it TLS or IPsec. And the idea is to, once you operate this kind of deployment, you can say, okay, I'm fitting all these requirements. So we expect that there are some easy way to probably secure Geneva requirements in, I'm saying 90% of the cases. But still, if we want to have something generic, we will need to add maybe another complexity, which is not always required. And so where we are with these two goals on the document, we have addressed the first one, but the second one is only partially addressed, and this is what we have to work on. So the reason I'm saying it's partly addressed is that we already provided some space to the policies, what you really want to achieve. So we detailed, if you want to mitigate these kind of threats, these are the requirements you will need to address, but in a generic way. I mean, so that you can fit this, you can address the mitigation in any Geneva deployment. So we need to add a clarification on for each requirement when the requirements apply. So that's what we will have to work, because deployments have additional policy. For example, do you really need to have a per flow policies, or is your deployment have some Geneva transit nodes? And given those choice and those architecture deployment scenario, you need to be really sure, and the requirement should be explicitly provided given these inputs. So the next iteration of the document is going to be specifying for each requirement what are the conditions. So in a way so that you can read the document saying, I have this deployment, which are the conditions I meet? And in that case, yeah, what are the requirements I should fulfill to use that document to say, my deployment is following the recommendation of RFC, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we still hope it's going to be an RFC. So that's how we're going to move the document forward. One point I'd like to mention is that there is already a document about NVO3 security requirements. And the current document is listing a list of security requirements. But because the conditions are integrated into the requirements, it often ends up in a may. With the new, well, how we're going to write the RFC, we're going to provide the conditions, and given the conditions, a may might become a must. It's not an inconsistency, it's just the way we write it. So this is something we would like you to understand if that's a fair way to do. And it's just to prevent that we will be somehow backfired saying there are inconsistency between the two documents. Yes, it's because it's the way it is written. In the previous document, I mean the NVO3 security requirements, you will have the condition expressed above or below the requirements, and then the requirement express that with a may, because the conditions are not always applied. In our case, the condition is going to be clearly applied, and then we might end up in another terminology. With the current state of the document, we haven't found inconsistency. So I think where we worked almost independently, and then we matched those requirements, and we found that overall we agree. So, well, the question I will have maybe is, do we have to to make this binding within the document, or can we leave this document independent? That's one question.
Sorry, just on the point about relationship to the old NVO3 security requirements document, that was written quite some time ago, and the authors haven't been active for a number of years now, and that's been expired for a number of years. So I really wouldn't tie this document too much to that one, because it was never really progressed beyond adoption. I think this one needs to go forward independently of that one. So if there's we don't know what's going to happen to that document if nobody picks it up and so on. It may just never get published. So yeah, whatever you need for Genève should be in this document. Don't rely on that document.
Okay, right. Okay, so well, the important message is that we will not specifically focus on the justification and regarding the previous document, but there is no major inconsistency. We haven't found any. And well, the other thing, we had some question, but I think it has been answered, is that some of the requirements are not specific to Geneva, so should we left them into the document? But since the document is not going to be published, my understanding is that we should integrate that into the current document here.
Yeah, because we don't want to get to a situation where we can have a misrep on this document when we try and publish it to the, because that document has not been, not been published.
Okay, right. So I think that's the end of the presentation. Thank you. And well, I think we had we had some conversations with Ilango, so we're going to clearly take in consideration the comments, and we had meetings. Of course, we chose to meet when we were in a very, very different time zones, but still it happened, and we really understand how to move the document forward. So the next version should be, I mean, in my case, I think there will be part of the process. So the next version we're going to publish is going to be integrated in the comments, I guess.
So, quick question. You plan to address the comments raised by Ilango in the next version? Is that what I heard? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know when that's going to happen?
I think now that we know how to address them, it can be, let's say, I'm not saying before the end of the month, but let's say by mid-April.
Okay.
So I think the thing to do is to publish a new individual document with incorporating them, and then we'll do a very quick adoption poll for that new one.
Okay.
Just bear in mind that an adoption poll is really just saying, is this roughly the direction the working group wants to go in, is the scope of the document about right for us, and is this something we want to work on? It's not saying that the document has to be perfect by any means. It just puts the document into the hands of the working group so that then we have control over it, and the content of the document then has to represent consensus of the working group going forward. Okay? Thank you.
So the next version is going to be 1 or 2 and not 0.0. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So any other comments? Great. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ilango. So next we have Greg. Greg, do you want to use that? You can move it. Well, you can just
Thank you. So as mentioned in a status, this is to refresh your memory and introduce what work been done by Overlay OAM design team, and we proposed header that can be common and used in different overlay networks for OAM. So it introduces the notion of overlay associated channel. The overlay associated channel idea is that it will include OAM information, and in normal condition OAM packets for active OAM will follow the same path as the payload. If, of course, there is no consideration of the payload content to draw and transport decision. So associated channel can carry information as for proactive and on-demand OAM, and can allows us to do separate development of OAM toolset. So the header allows the versioning, includes the message type, length, flags reserved, and the next protocol field, followed by control packet. So the requirements towards the overlay encapsulation, that it contains all the information that needs to be used for transport decision, and thus OAM packet or active OAM packet can be encapsulated in the same manner as payload flow, so that we ensure that it's in band, and then can draw useful conclusion from the OAM results or status change. So this is to demonstrate what and how overlay header can be used. So if the next protocol field is 0, that will be used for active OAM encapsulation, that we have overlay OAM control message, and obviously, so this is a test packet that's being injected and consumed in overlay domain. But if we use next protocol field that points to the type of the payload, then it will look like this example, and their payload can be data. So this is more like a hybrid OAM case scenario. So in short, this is idea behind the overlay header, and it's used in overlay networks for active and hybrid OAM. We appreciate your comments, suggestions, and would like to ask working group and chairs to consider working group adoption, or adoption by the working group.
Thanks, Greg. So just a little bit of history on this. So we did run a working group adoption poll a while ago on this document. At the time, we had really very few people, very few participants on, either, we had basically very few proposing the adoption and very few opposing the adoption on the list. It was very difficult to judge if there was really energy in the working group for going forward with this approach, given the lack of participation on the list for that, for or against it, which is why we didn't progress it at the time. I think it would be very good to see and get some idea if people have now read this document, and if they think we should go forward with this approach. If you don't think we should go forward with this approach, one of the issues that we've got is there haven't been any other recent drafts with alternative OAM approaches, and we do need to start considering OAM in this working group. So, we can't kind of just sit there with the only proposal that's currently on the table saying we don't want to adopt it if there's no alternative being proposed. Sorry, go ahead.
Frank Ruckners, in the same vein, what would help the document, Greg, is if you would add a applicability section that would state how that particular header, and it might be just a couple of examples, how that particular header would be slotted in with, say, Genève, GRE, and the likes, because what you have from a header perspective right now works well with protocols that have a next header flagged, and that next header pointer is 8 bits. If the next header pointer is an either type, like 16 bits with GRE, it doesn't actually apply. So I think what might help is really outlining and showing how it fits and where it fits and where it does not fit, so that people feel attracted, like, this solves my problem, or it doesn't really solve my problem. And I think that way, I think you get more appeal to people to care about it.
Okay, so you're suggesting that different encapsulations have a different length of the next protocol field?
It depends on where you want to go with this. I think that's the question on applicability, right? So if you have GRE, then, well, naturally the next thing will be something either type. And the next protocol field there would be a 16-bit field. But I'm just wondering, so how does it apply? Where does it apply? And outlining that in the document with a couple of examples, how it fits into the variety of overlays that we have out there would be of great help.
Yeah. Again, I'll thank you for your comment and suggestion. I'll definitely look in the document, but our original goal was that to make it used in new overlay encapsulations as Geneve, beer, and NSH. Whether it's applicable to GRE, is it required to be applicable in GRE? That's something that definitely we should discuss.
Well, I think that's my point, right? So let's state that explicitly, have a applicability deployment section, and then let's say, well, this is how it looks in beer, Geneve, NSH, and by the way, it does not apply to GRE and CAPS and the likes.
Well, actually, in beer, NSH, and Geneve, it doesn't look any different.
So I think if I understand right, whether it supports or not, providing certain examples and will definitely help in actually understanding what exactly it does.
I'll look at the document and make it explicit.
Hi, Brian Weiss from Cisco. Thanks for yesterday in IPPM. We had a little discussion about this. And thank you for pointing out the draft. I've read through it now. I'm just curious to know, it does seem to be an in-band OAM kind of method, except it's just the types of data that is specified as the timestamp only. So I was wondering if you could characterize to me how this is just functionally different than the IOAM work being done in IPPM, because I don't quite understand that yet.
Again, I want to stress that in-band behavior of OAM is the function of encapsulation layer where it draws their forwarding decision. Okay, so if it draws only from the encapsulation information, not from the payload, then any type of OAM will be in-band, whether it's hybrid or active. And that's why we have a special section on requirements towards encapsulation, that in order to ensure that active OAM is in-band with the data flow, that puts certain restrictions onto how their forwarding decision should be drawn. And one of the examples that we have here is example that how this type of encapsulation can be used for IOAM. Again, I want to point is that the format of the header is something that we can discuss and try to address as many use cases as possible.
Okay, just one more question since you put the slide up. Can you explain, I didn't quite understand from the draft how next protocol field is intended to be used. Is it supposed to have an IP protocol in it, or is it simply as a 0 meaning there's nothing, no data, and 1 meaning there's data following, and
yes,
and then you have to look at the first byte or something of that and figure, or the first part of that header and figure out what it is?
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right. Because their header has a length, and if next protocol is 0, that means that you have only OAM control packet. If you have next protocol non-zero, then you have something that follows the control packet. And the next protocol characterizes what you have after the OAM control packet.
Okay, I think I'll have to take that offline.
Yeah.
So, as I still don't see a namespace that characterizes what's next.
Right, but next protocol, their registry, it's something that we can discuss how it can be normalized.
Okay, I think we have to then go on the queue on the Meetucker.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my question is, the OAM, the proposal that you're having, the header is applicable at different layers. It could be at the overlay layer, and also it could be if you're using it along with NSH, then it is actually a part of the service overlay, or you can call it as a service plane, right? So it's possible that both could coexist, and the document does not necessarily give enough applicability, information, or how it will be used when if you need OAM at both levels.
It's a very interesting perspective. I would personally think that it's unlikely that the same packet will be OAM for different layers.
Not necessarily true, right? So for example, if you take NSH could be transported on multiple different transports, and depending upon what is the underlay network, they might pick certain encapsulation, and it could also go through multiple different encapsulations before it reaches the service nodes. So in this case, the OAM as part of the NSH header is independent of the OAM in the underlay or the overlay transport that is using. So both could coexist as well.
No, right, I agree, but I think that it will be interesting, helpful to get some operational consideration whether it's plausible scenario in use that one packet is OAM for NSH and the underlay transport at the same time. I would think that it creates some complexity for fault localization and troubleshooting, because how to identify where the fault happened, it's probably much easier if it's done on the different layers independently.
Right, you might have to give it some thought on this one, because it can happen at different layers, and clarify that possibly in a future version of the document.
Okay, so why didn't you take that offline?
No, but I agree that intention of this construct is that it can be applied in the different layers, but independently, not on both layers, for example.
Okay, so why don't you take it offline with Tilango, and we can clarify.
Parviz Yagani, Ishure. Back to Frank's question on applicability. If you really look at NSH, so you're going to change the behavior of your SFC nodes on this, or this is just metadata that is in-band, that's transparent? You have a service function, and then you have the forwarding node. Is this going to impact the behavior of the forwarding node or the SF, or is all transparent?
No, actually, it should be, again, if we talk about active OAM, right? So we have multi-layer active OAM document, individual document in SFC working group. So the scope of it is SFF, not the service function.
So the forwarding behavior.
Yeah, the forwarding behavior is based on SFP, not on the service function.
Okay. And that the behavior changes are captured. Sorry, I haven't read the actual behavior of the forwarding node is captured, or that is?
No,
outside the scope?
the expected behavior, at least the document introduces echo request, echo reply, so that SFF can be addressed and either reply to the sender as expected, out of band.
Greg, speaking as individual is Sam, quick clarification question. So are you going to pursue this, you mentioned in different working groups like SFC. So the clarification question I have is, are you going to pursue to get a common solution, or are you going to pursue to have individual solutions?
Thank you, Sam. If the working group, and we had the discussion before, so if the working group, I will work in the current document in the header. Yes, we have echo request reply document resulting from our overlay design team as well, but there are like dependency between header and this work. And if both documents would be considered by this NVO3 working group and adopted, I will pursue as a common solution. But if not, then we'll continue with SFC.
Okay, so let's get a show of hands for who's read the latest version of this draft. So please raise your hand if you've read this draft. Okay, so it's probably 10 or 12. Of those who have read it, raise your hand if you think the general approach of having an overlay OAM header in, say, Draft Geneve is the right way to go for OAM. Okay, that's one. Of those who have read it, who does not think it's a good idea? Okay, so I'm going to assume that the rest of you are undecided. Undecided. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Please, the rest of you, please read the draft, and maybe go ahead with some of the revisions that might help to clarify it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Aliyah.
Yeah, so I'd like to reiterate, I'm really happy to see the discussion actually happening on OAM here. I think this was very helpful. This is something that the working group was supposed to work on over 4 years ago. It was something that needed to get done when I became responsibility for the group. So please, we need this. VXLAN's been deployed for a really long time, and Geneve's coming, and one of the value adds that the IETF is supposed to do is management. Let's get it right. Thank you. Sorry, let's get it done. Best is not the enemy of the good. Thanks.
Thank you, Aliyah.
All right, next up is staying with the multi-encapsulation interconnection. So just forward and backwards. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ting Ao from ZTE. This presentation is about multiple encapsulation interconnection in virtualized overlay network. This is the first presentation, and the draft is primary, so you can interrupt me at any time. And first is the background. As we know that we have many overlay technologies, such as VXLAN, GP, Geneve, NVGRE, etc. And different vendor may use different encapsulations. So the problem is, for a virtual network, all hosts that connect to the same virtual network and want to communicate to each other are required to have the same data plan encapsulation. Otherwise, they will not communicate each other. So if we want to support multiple encapsulation interconnection, we suggest to introduce a new component in architecture. The new component is, we call it transformer gateway. Generally, the gateway is located in NVE, so we also create transformer NVE, TNVE in abbreviation. The TNVE has been highlighted in with the red circle. TNVE provide a bridge function for the two NVEs that may not share the same encapsulation but want to communicate to each other. So the TNVE is the most important component for such interconnection. Here we provide the TNVE reference model. In this model, NVE1 and NVE3 using different encapsulation, but they want to communicate. So TNVE is required to adapt to the encapsulations on NVE1 and NVE3, so that it can take the role of interconnection between NVE1 and NVE3. For TNVE, its procedure is TNVE will encapsulate the packet from NVE1 and then encapsulates the packets to NVE3 with the data plane in NVE3 and vice versa. With TNVE interconnection, for NVE1 and NVE3, there is no need to detect the difference of their data plane. To support such interconnection, control message also have some requirements. For TNVE, it need to notify NVA the encapsulations it support. And NVE to NVA, NVE will notify the NVA adjacent mapping between the NVE and its attached TS as usual. And in addition, NVE also need to notify to NVA that encapsulation the NVE support. And optional, NVE also need to notify the NVA some mandate metadata. And for NVA to NVE, it is as usual that NVA will notify the NVE adjust mapping information between the remote NVE and the TS. Okay, that's all. Any comments and feedback, welcome. And I will update the draft based on your comments. Thank you.
Hi, Kyle LaRose. I'm curious as to what led you to start working on this, because I've been reading a draft today, sort of on and off, about, it's called the gateway function for network slicing, which, I mean, I haven't finished it yet, so I might be misinterpreting it, but it sounds like it's talking about a similar problem where you're moving between different administrative domains in an NFV network, and they have different capabilities, different underlays, things like that, and there's a gateway function that's translating between them. Now, the document I'm reading is much higher level. It looks like it's not really specifying the data plane. Maybe there's some, and it's for the comms BOF tomorrow.
Yeah, it's just a gateway for data plane to communicate.
So I'm just wondering if this might be appropriate for that, or if there's some overlap here that we might want to talk to the draft author about. I can send you the draft if you want after the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Zaki Haramati from Mellanox. I would like to ask just about one point. I wrote in the document that the TNV can be combined as an NV to connect it directly to the TS. And I was wondering what is the reason for this. I mean, logically, I think it's a separate entity. Even if a vendor will combine them, logically it is still something else.
It's a logical component. It connected to TS or several TS.
Yeah, I'm still saying that the TNV as a logical component does not need to connect directly to the TS itself.
TLV?
It's a TNV.
TNVE.
T of TME.
Yeah, it's a transforming entity.
Do you understand my question? Can you roll back to the reference model? Yes. So basically,
In the document, it's explained that TNV in the middle can connect directly to TS. It can be.
maybe.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's.
not the requirement.
I know, but I'm saying that even connecting directly, it's not. It's like a different logical entity.
Right, yes, of course. That's why we give it a different name.
Okay.
Frank Bruckner, I have another, say, high-level question. Where do you want to go take that work? Because right now it's mostly articulation of the problem domain. It's a bit of a framework document. And you could say, well, I have this Uber thing that provides for mapping and the likes, and that might be OpenStack, that might be something, right? So where do you want to go take that? Do you want to go and specify the protocols to go and provide for these addresses, or so what's the next step that you're intending with this?
Do you mean the protocol from TME to MA and to notify the encapsulation?
Well, I think you articulated you articulated an architecture. You have a system that has two tunnel types arriving at that very node. Today, well, I have a VXLAN tunnel coming in. I have a Geneve tunnel leaving. I have, well, a bridging function that's connecting those two. You get that set up, and I think what you're articulating is that somebody needs to go and set that up, control the endpoints. And are you intending to go and standardize the control protocols to do that? Or so once we have this, what is the next step?
If I may. Greg Nursky as a co-author of this draft. Yes, Frank is right. So this is a problem statement at this time. So what we are looking for, the feedback of the working group and discussion of whether it's a problem that needs to be solved. How that will be, what's the conclusion, whether it's like adoption of this document would be agreement that this is a problem that needs to be solved. It's not necessarily that this document will be the document that will provide the protocol or standard part of solution. But in the document, we point to the areas that needs to be solved, because there needs to be some negotiation normalization of what's different protocol are capable of, what features are common features and what can be translated. So yes, there will be some protocol or some negotiation, normalization of the control plane in order then to be able to work on a data plane layer.
And I think, Greg, that's part of the problem, because we only really have one potential, at the moment, potential standardized encapsulation here. Of course, there are many others out there in the wild, and there are others that have been developed and will or may go forward as individual drafts.
Right.
But it's kind of, interworking between our standard encapsulation and, as yet, an indeterminate set of other ones that are not standard yet, or some of them are well understood, some are less well understood.
So that's why we're not going in the solution, but first we're saying, if we see this problem, would the working group agree that that's the problem worth solving and working on?
I mean, at the moment, we have a framework RFC that defines the architecture really, and this is kind of an extension, I suppose, at least at this stage, to that. Okay. I think we need to move on. Right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next is Yolanda.
Hello, everyone. So I want to introduce the packet spraying function in the Geneva overlay network. So we also have my colleague Haijo online. So this is quite new draft, and we will very appreciate for your comment to help us move forward. So as we know, the congestion is a killer of the network performance. So there are two kinds of congestions in the data center network. It's in-network congestion and endpoint congestion. So here we want to discuss in-network congestions, that is caused by the poor traffic spraying. So path selection could be treated as a load balancing issue, and currently there are several load balancing technologies to resolve the in-network congestion problem, such as the well-known ECMP, flowlet, and the packet spraying. So we think that packet is currently the smallest granularity for the open system. But if we spray the packet into the different paths, that will lead the packets out of order problem. So here we introduce a packet spraying mechanism, which includes actually two parts. The first one is packet spraying on the source end endpoints, and another is a reordering on the destination endpoints. Here in the paragraph, we could see that the first step, the source endpoint will spray the packets on the different parts, and here it's the layer 2 two-tier cross network. And in this scenario, we do not need to modify the span switch, and we just need to modify the leaf switch or. And here in this draft, we use the Geneva to encapsulate the packet sequence number. And on the second step, on the destination endpoint, we will do the reordering either on the leaf switch or on the server. So for those, as we know that TCP has provided the reordering function, but for those old operating system or some circumstances will not use a TCP reordering. So we think that packet reordering is still needed in these scenarios. In this draft, we proposed the packet spring format over Geneva. So in the option field of Geneva, we use two fields. One is a flow group ID, the other is sequence number. And each will use 4 bytes separately. And the flow group ID, the definition of it is that we identify a group of flows, use 3 tuple between a source destination pair, which is source address, destination address, and the flow group ID. And we use, next we will explain more about this field. The second is sequence number, which is well known. It ranged from 0 to 32 power of 2 minus 1. And if we do the packet spray function on the source endpoint, we will use the flow group ID to spray the packet. Flow group ID may correspond to an individual flow or some subset of the flow, or even all the flows between the source destination pair. But in this draft, we didn't introduce how to correspond the flows into different flow group ID. And so within the flow group ID, there is a sequence number space, and the source node will allocate the sequence number to the packets and belongs to the same flow group. At destination here, at destination point, we will do the reordering with the 3 tuple by the sequence number. But here, we want to mention that the destination should notify the source node that the capability of the reordering, which means that the negotiation of the capability should take place. So the more generic control plane is needed to realize this function. So when the source node know that the capability of the destination, so they need to tune to the allocation mechanism of the flow group ID. And if the flow group ID received on the destination exceeds the local capability, here we recommend 2 ways to move forward. The first one is just discard the Geneva packet, which exceed the local capability. The second is just to remove the Geneva encapsulation and move the packet to higher layer to do the reordering. Because the time reason, we didn't finish all the simulation here, just share the performance comparison on the packed spree function, and we will finish the rest simulation and share with others later. So here it's a 3-tier class topology, and we use the 3-core switch and the 32 edge switch and the 32 leaf switch. So here the traffic pattern is only use UDP because we want to get rid of the influence of the TCP retransmission. And in the future, we may simulate the TCP traffic as well. So based on the comparison that we use a different load balancing granularity, we use the parameter n. So the n power of 2 means the granularity to spread the packet. So if the n equals to 0, that means it's a packet spree scenario. If n equals to 12, it's close to the ECMP. We compare the 3 factors: throughput, packet drop, and average latency. So here is the 3 scenarios, the performance comparison that we run each comparison 4 rounds with different random seeds, and we could see that the left up paragraph that we could see that on the rightest point is ECMP, that ECMP get the worst performance and packet spree will get the higher throughput performance. On the right up paragraph that when we do the packet spree per packet, that the packet drop is quite low. And when we do the ECMP, the packet drops increase. And about the average latency, we could see that packet spree can achieve the more better performance than the ECMP. Okay, so next step, since it's a quite new draft and we want to seek more comments and more collaboration in the future work. So we will continue the simulation and share with via emails or maybe the presentations next time. And in the same time, we will we'll cooperate with other customers and to run the test on a real test bed. That's all.
Hi, Kyle Rose. Thanks, that was pretty cool. I'm curious as to what you put in a source port of the UDP header in the Geneva encapsulation. Did you put the same source port for all packets in one flow, or did you randomize the source port as well so you would get distribution within the mesh?
So you mean in the simulation?
Yeah.
We put this encapsulation in.
So you're using Geneva, right, for the encapsulation?
Yeah, we.
So the Geneva specification says that you should put entropy into the source port of the UDP. Someone's maybe coming to talk here, but
Source port.
I'm just, so when you built the Geneva header and you put the UDP header that makes part of it on the packet, what value did you choose for the source port? Was it fixed? Was it based on the flow? Or was it actually something essentially random? Because you're allowing reordering within the network.
Yes, currently in our simulation it's random, but we are considering to involve the load-aware parameter, but it is not simulated.
I guess what I'm saying is it would be nice to have some guidance on this in the draft, because if you make it equal to the flow, which is what the Geneva specification says it should be, then any if all the packets end up going through one path at some point and there's congestion there, they'll only ever take the one link. But if you make it essentially random, then even if they hit the same device in the network, they might choose multiple next hops on that device.
Yeah.
So it's just, that might be something worth thinking about.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
Hi, Zaki Harmati from Mellanox. I have two questions. Question number one regarding the name of the document called packet spraying. I think that packet spraying is just a unique case that can be random, it can be adaptive routing. The document actually talks about packet reordering. Maybe I missed something?
Well, again, I think that as Kyle pointed out, packet reordering may happen. It's not the goal.
But the document defines a framework for handling packet reordering. That's the whole essence of the document, regardless why the reordering has happened.
Right. Again, my understanding of the document that says because of spraying, reordering may happen, and that's how we recommend to handle the situation. Okay, so it's not that we want to reordering. Reordering is a result of known behavior, and this is a proposal of mitigating this.
Yeah, yes, not
Okay,
mandatory.
I'm repeating myself, so I'll not say it again. Okay. Another issue, there is in chapter 5.3 about TCP UDP over Geneva. I think it's a general infrastructure that is good, but not in this specific document.
Yes, I didn't mention in this draft, in this presentation, because I got the comment via email. This should be a separate draft, and in some circumstances, there is no encapsulation, and we want to over the TCP directly on the Geneva and to save the header. So we will initiate another draft about that. So if you're interested, we could cooperate.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
So we've got Hajo as well on the Meet Echo. I did open it for him.
Hajo?
Yeah, Hajo.
Okay.
Do you want to speak, Hajo?
No, nothing more. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're getting congestion.
He just stand there to answer questions.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, I think thank you. I think we better move on. Thanks. Right. So the last thing on the agenda is a little bit of time on next steps in the working group and moving forward. So I think we're quite close to working group last call with the Geneva data plane. Security is well underway now. So we need to really consider what documents we want to make progress on next. So we just had a discussion about OAM. I think we've identified at least some ways to improve the OAM draft that Greg has presented. On EVPN for our distributed control plane, as we mentioned, we're going to run a poll for adoption for the EVPN applicability draft after this IETF. So that really leaves open the centralized control plane or / management plane. We did have a Yang model draft at one time for VXLAN. But we also really need a Yang model for Geneva. I mean, a more general kind of overall Yang model, I think, for configuring the various elements in the NVO3 architecture. So we're kind of thinking one way forward with this is to form a Yang design team within NVO3. Personally, having been on these Yang design teams in the past for getting Yang models done, they're quite an efficient way of doing it. So if anyone's interested in participating, that would very much help the working group move forward in this area. Is anybody, maybe raise your hand if you're interested in developing a Yang model for NVO3? Well, I can't believe nobody has been very active in other parts of the IETF. So, okay, if you have a think about it, and if you could email the chairs, if you're interested. Of course, this is more in the management plane. We haven't really focused very much on a centralized, true centralized control plane yet. So maybe we could invite drafts in that area as well. Elia.
Sorry, I just like to face everyone, you know. So what are you all interested in working on? Is this just, let's get Geneva done? Because that's a great piece, but we do need some other chunks along. And we've talked about doing Yang model stuff. If that's not the right management or central orchestration answer for what you're looking for, what is? Are there things that we're missing? The charter for NVO3 is fairly old. So what's missing? Obviously, you're all here. Hopefully, you're watching and being interested. What are you interested in working on? What do you see as gaps?
Any comments? And specifically, I guess the thing we've pointed. I mean, we know that we're missing Yang models, but is there anything else that needs to be done for a centralized control plane? I mean, there is work going on, for example, in LSVR with a centralized control plane model with using BGP and data centers. Is that relevant here? Any opinions? Would you like to see any work done in the NVO3 working group in that area? Please raise your hand if you'd like NVO3 to work on a more dynamic centralized control plane than you would get through management. Do you see a need for that? Okay.
Martin Vigo, incoming routing lady. So, yeah. So seeing the overwhelming number of responses to Matthew, so I'll ask a different question. Should I close the working group after we've done Geneva?
So let's have a poll, right? So, I mean, when we're done Geneva, do you think we've finished our work and we should close the working group? Please raise your hands. Apart from OAM.
Okay. Yes, Greg Mirsky, ZT, and let's then define what it's done. Does it mean that Geneva specification achieves standard or RFC state, or we've done OAM as well and done Yang model? So I think that to me, to say yes, first I need to understand what done means.
So just an example for the Yang, right? No one in the room raised their hands, right? So do you like to see that complete as an individual?
Okay. Give us some time to sleep on it. Okay? Because, jumping the gun might be not the best. At least with years, that's what I learned. And probably I would appreciate if we discuss really more seriously what done means, what the scope of the work we believe that will be a complete set of functionality that we can release to the world and said, yes, we're done.
So I didn't raise my hand in favor of a Yang model only because I didn't want to get volunteered to be an editor. But we just saw one document that discussed a potential new option for Geneva headers, and in general, I'm not quite sure how you would go about defining a standardized option if we didn't continue to have some kind of effort. And a Yang model for the configuration of that would probably be a very useful thing. So I guess I am sort of speaking in favor of seeing something done for centralized configuration.
Speaking as individual, I also, we had a good presentation from Frank on the IOAM, so I'm not sure if the draft authors are willing to pursue. Maybe Frank could speak up if they want to pursue that work.
I just have a question. When you say when Geneva is achieved, do you include the security mechanisms as well, or?
Yeah. This isn't as soon as we've published the Geneva RFC. This is when we've completed the things like the data plane security. Sorry, I should have been clearer on that. The data plane security and the OAM for that. I mean, really, the question is, do we need to go further than that in the controller management plane?
Yeah, Frank Rocknerson. There is multiple aspects to OAM, right? So there is active OAM, there is the in situ OAM aspect. Some of that work is done in IPPM, not here. But I would definitely think that it makes sense to go and at least create the big, or continue with the big ticket items to make it a complete protocol solution, as opposed to kind of give up halfway.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you would very likely see another group that needs to at least do, maybe call that Geneva maintenance, then do that work.
Okay.
So I'd also advocate for a piece that defines Yang models, not that I'm volunteering as an editor. But that would be useful work.
Justin Sirnosh, with regards to Yang design team, I would highly recommend to have one. Speaking as routing chair, we had routing Yang design team for 3 years, delivered great models. We're shutting down actually this IETF, but we've done all the work we needed to, and it's always good to have people have domain understanding as well as young understanding. So I would highly advise to create one.
Sure.
Yeah, so sure, just, yeah, drop us an email. Please email the chairs. You can find our email addresses on the charter, I think. If you would be prepared to serve on the Yang design team, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Those are well-known people, you know where to find them, and I mean,
Yeah.
young expertise outside of net model scarce, and potentially we could discuss people who worked in routing to start some work.
Yeah.
Martin, speaking again as incoming AD. May I suggest that you relay these questions on the list to reach a broader audience?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we'll bring it up in the routing area open meeting.
Okay.
Okay, and with that, I think we're done just on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For those who hasn't yet signed the blue sheet, please sign the sheet. Might have a cookie.